Hey everybody, my name is Jennifer Rodriguez, and today we are going to be going over how abuse develops. I'm going to be talking about how grooming, coercion, and control, both overt and covert, can play a part. And I'll go over the differences between overt and covert in just a few moments here. But first, I do want to go over just a couple of quick things before we dive into any content. Bear with me here. All right, so first, just a quick trigger warning because this class is going to get really heavy. I'm going to be discussing many harmful relationship dynamics, including many forms of abuse. So please take care of yourself during this session. I'm also going to be sharing some live events that happened to me just to help you understand the frameworks better and why they are the way they are. Now, I will keep it as unexplicit as possible, but I will share the details that are needed to make sure that everything is clear. I'll also give you a heads up before I share any examples, but just keep that in mind. I will be sharing those as we go, so please use that pause or play button as needed. We'll also have some breaks as we go throughout as well. Now, some boundaries. I am not a licensed medical professional or clinician. I'm going to be pursuing a domestic violence certificate. I do currently have a certification to assist commercially sexually exploited youth. The company that I got that from is called Saving Innocence. I also do have some small courses I completed from the victim assistance training online, but I'm currently working on other certificates. So just keep in mind that if you do communicate with me, there are certain ethical lines that I will need to stay behind. So we'll be discussing patterns, dynamics, and practical navigation tools, but I'm not going to be providing individualized crisis intervention in this setting. But I do want to let you know how personal conversations will go with me. So I'm not about to share anybody's business with some rando. That's just not going to happen. And if I'm not required to say anything, I'm not. So if you're an adult and you tell me that you were abused at one point or anything like that, I'm not going to share your story with anyone because there's no need for that. The only thing I may have to share, however, is if a minor is being abused and that is disclosed to me, I am what's called a mandated reporter. So that means that if you or a minor discloses that an abuse is occurring, I will need to report that. Now, as far as the steps I'll take, I'll call either my local authorities, your local authorities, whatever I can do. And I will make sure that there is a competent person that I'm speaking with who understands why what you're experiencing is harmful. But I will have to step out at that point. So just keep that in mind, okay? But if something comes up for you during this training that you don't wish to share, either via comment or one-on-one with me, that is completely fine. Any disclosures are optional. I will still provide some professional resources afterward, so you'll be able to have access to those. But let's go ahead and get started with some content. If you need to take a break here, that is totally okay. I'm okay myself, so I'm going to go ahead and keep going. If you need to pause it and play, feel free to do so. But I'm also going to turn off my camera too. 1 second. All right, so starting out here with covert versus overt. So with both types of abuse, they can both be very difficult to recognize, especially from inside the dynamic. Or from inside the dynamic, sorry, word. Gaslighting, rewriting events, and blame shifting. They often blur clarity and delay accountability. And both of those things are really helpful when it comes to repairing some harm, right? So, of course, they want to avoid those things because they don't want that harm repaired. Now, control can either be subtle, strategic, and easy to miss, even by those experiencing it. Overt control, however, is typically more visible from the outside. So the person experiencing that control might not notice it as abuse or a control tactic. It's completely understandable. Whether that's overt or covert, the person inside the dynamic may be experiencing it being normalized or minimized. They also may minimize it themselves just to kind of protect themselves from any further disappointment. Now, that said, the ability to leave a situation like this, it does not always correlate with the visibility of harm. Those psychological hooks run deep and they are incredibly painful. And not to mention the other barriers, practical barriers too. But we'll talk more about that in future workshops. I'm also going to talk about how this training is structured. So I'm not going to upload all 4 parts to YouTube. This first part, obviously, I'm uploading it here. It's available today. This first part is going to cover the foundational concepts and stages of abuse. Now, the other 3 parts, they will be accessible for free, and I'll explain how to access them in a moment here, but they are not going to be available on YouTube. So part 2 will be available no later than February 27th. Part 3 will be available no later than March 13th, and part 4 will be available no later than March 27th. Each of these trainings will vary in time, but I'll do my best to keep them less than an hour. They will not be any more than 2 hours. And to request those additional trainings, you can email me at echoesofstrength9@gmail.com. Now, as I mentioned, payment is not going to be required for those additional trainings. The reason that I require an email to request that is just because I'm going to be sharing a bit more about what I'm doing with my mission and things like that. But we'll go ahead and dive in. All right. I don't need a break myself right now, but I did need a breath. If anyone needs a break right now, it's totally okay. I went through a lot of information really fast, so I completely understand if you need a moment. If you need to pause and play this video, that's totally okay. But I'm going to go ahead and keep going because I'm okay. And I'll be here when you get back if you pause, okay? But let's go ahead and keep going. All right. So this information is going to be available in the terms handout, but I want to go over this verbally as well. So toxic behavior, I'm going to start with that. So with toxic behavior, it's typically learned or unhealthy relational behaviors. Now, these may not be strategic, however, they still cause harm. And I want to let you know too, all of these patterns cause harm, and impact or the harm caused is always going to matter more than the intent behind it. So let me start there. Now, with toxic patterns, they're typically not intentional. They typically aren't intended to hurt you, at least. They're typically intended for their own survival and their own thought process and their own perception of you and what your intentions are with them. Now, that does not excuse anything. Toxic is still toxic. If someone's violating your boundaries, they're not safe to be around, they're intimidating, you still don't have to put up with that. And you still don't have to deal with that. You still have the right to set boundaries. Just because they're hurting doesn't mean that they should hurt you by default. That's just not how life works. It's one thing to support somebody, it's another thing to allow harm to continue. Now, predatory patterns and abusive patterns, I'm going to talk about those next because those typically have intent behind them. Now, these terms are often used interchangeably, but they can describe different patterns of harm. Now, I'm going to say this. I'm not going to be pathologizing anybody because I don't have the credentials to do that, and I'm not going to do that anyway. But understanding the distinction about patterns and behaviors, it's not about labeling them prematurely, but it is about clarifying risk, behavior patterns, and safety planning. Because whether a person is inherently a predator or not, if they are engaging in predatory behavior, that's still not safe. But I'm going to explain why here. So, predatory and abusive behavior often overlap frequently, but in both cases, harm occurs and safety is very much compromised. So, as far as those differences, an abuser is someone who causes harm within a relationship dynamic, and that's through patterns of control, coercion, manipulation, and repeated boundary violations. Now, in many abusive dynamics, the person's main focus is maintaining power, entitlement, or control within a relationship. The harm may escalate over time as they learn what works to silence, dominate, or destabilize the other person. Now, abusive behavior can be reactive, strategic, or both, but it does center on control within an existing dynamic. And one thing I'll say about abusers is, and I want to say this too, this is not always the case, So sometimes an abuser who is not a predatory abuser may genuinely believe that they love the person that they're abusing. But obviously, you can't really love somebody who you're harming. That's not how that works. Now, a predator is typically almost always going to use the same tactics as abusers. So they use a lot of the gaslighting, a lot of the silencing, domination, etc. However, they use it a lot differently. So they intentionally seek access to others for the purpose of exploitation. Now, predators, like I said, they may use a lot of those same tactics, but the behavior is often characterized by deliberate targeting of vulnerability. So they deliberately look for people who have vulnerabilities that they can use. They don't just create a power imbalance, they look for a situation where a power imbalance is already there by default. They also use calculated grooming designed to build access, dependency, leverage, that sort of thing. They don't do, like, they may do love bombing. They may use some of those same tactics. They may say they love you early, but it's not because they mean it. That's usually the difference with a predator or a predatory abuser. They also use power, secrecy, and authority strategically. So a lot of predators may actually appear submissive until that's no longer going to be useful for them to get what they want. But they have a clear goal of gain, whether that's control, access, sex, labor, money, status, or compliance. In predatory dynamics, the exploitation itself is often the primary objective. So they're not looking just to dominate somebody, they're looking to gain something out of somebody. That's also why a lot of abusers may be predatory abusers, but not all abusers are predators. So let's keep that in mind. So yeah, like I said, not all abusers fit the pattern of predation, but predatory behavior always involves abuse, even if it looks gentle. Now, understanding this mechanism can help clarify why some dynamics escalate rapidly, might explain why some behaviors feel calculated rather than reactive. It also may provide more precise ways to understand how you need a safety plan too. Now, it also can reduce the self-blame if you identify when you were intentionally exploited. Now, it doesn't magically disappear. I'm going to tell you that right now, but it can help. But to be clear, you do not need to determine which term applies in order to deserve safety. Okay? Both abuse and predation cause harm, and both warrant protection and response. So whether you're dealing with a predator, an abuser, or a predatory abuser, you still deserve protection, you still deserve safety. None of those things are going to change. Keep in mind those patterns also overlap constantly. Oh, right. So I know I threw a lot of information out there at you. I'm kind of also saying this stuff for myself too, because it does ground me a little bit. But if you need a break right now, if you need to pause the video, maybe get a snack or a blanket, totally welcome to do that. There's no problem with that. In fact, I'm going to stretch a little bit myself. But I'll be here when you get back. If you want to pause this video and come back to it, I'll be right here for you. All right. But I'm okay right now, so I'm going to go ahead and keep going. Now, these slides, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it, but these are the 10 recognized signs of abuse or recognized types of abuse. Keep in mind that this might not be an exhaustive list. All right, so we'll go ahead and go over the overlap between exploitation and abuse. So abusive and exploitative dynamics often have a lot of overlap because they often work together. But here's the clearest way that I can describe it. So abuse creates a power imbalance, often through fear, shame, guilt, isolation, coercion, all of those things, right? And many more. And sometimes it can look gentle. So sometimes it can be gently like instilling fear into you or gently instilling guilt or shame into you. It depends on what tactics they use. Like I said, abusers aren't always mean. They really aren't. But exploitation, though, leverages that power imbalance for gain or for whatever the abuser's initial goal was. Whether they had a goal going into it or whether they develop a goal as the relationship progresses, they exploit whatever power dynamic is built for that goal. For example, with sexual exploitation, that is always going to involve sexual abuse. Whether that abuse looks gentle or rough depends on how the situation unfolds. But the exploitative factor is the gain that the abuser gets. So, for example, with commercial exploitation, there's tangible gain to it. Tangible meaning something that you can hold in your hands. With non commercial exploitation, there's typically an intangible gain or a gain that you can't hold, but you know is there. So, something like power, ego reinforcement, control, validation, and so on. And sometimes people like this are just sadistic. That's that's a story for another day, though. But one thing I want to say about exploitation is that it is not defined by visibility. It's not defined by whether someone sees what's happening from the outside or not. It's defined by who benefits and at whose expense. All right. So we're not too far from being done. Obviously, if you need a break, that's totally okay. I'm going to go ahead and keep going. But I'll go ahead and go over the stages of abuse. And if you do pause the video, I'll be right here when you get back. But abuse often follows patterns. So these patterns depend heavily on the person committing the abuse. So it's not a rigid script. These stages can often repeat, overlap, happen out of order, or be used differently. Now, one thing I will say is that sometimes the stages can start differently. Because it's a cycle, there's no real starting point. And I'll explain a little bit about that in a second. But here's some of the common stages. So there's some sources that tell us that it starts at tension building, goes to incident, and then a calm. Some sources say that it starts with grooming, then tension, then incident, then calm. And then sometimes some abusive situations will start with an incident and then grooming. It really just depends. And sometimes grooming too. I'll explain a little bit more about that in a second. But I am about to give a live example. So this live example is going to include a sexual violation, some coercion, some gaslighting, as well as some really confusing stuff. I This happened to me in 2006, and I didn't put together until 2025. Yeah, so just to show you how confusing that stuff can be. But as far as the live example, I'll go ahead and start after this next slide. But as mentioned, these stages can overlap. And also, like I said, different sources convey the stages slightly differently. And of course, some start with tension building, some start with honeymoon phase. It just depends. Now, as far as that live example that I talked about. So this particular abuser, it was oh, okay. So he started with asking me out in a very indirect way after I shared something personal. And that felt so safe. And I don't know how to explain it. I just kind of felt chosen. So it started with a quick grooming. It was a very quick kind of like feeling of being chosen, feeling of being special, that sort of thing, because I shared something personal. And after he saw the personal things, he wanted to have a relationship with me and interact with me more. I mean, who wouldn't feel chosen after something like that, right? But you see, I was 13 at the time, as was he. So it was, yeah. We were both very young, and I was not prepared. But after that, maybe about 2 or 3 days later, he sends somebody else to break up with me for him. And I was a little sad, but I wasn't distraught. So in that sense, I was tense. I was just really tense. I was wondering what I did. If I upset him, if maybe I did something wrong, or if he just thought it wasn't working out. I was prepared to accept whatever answer he was giving me when I reached out to him, but I reached out to him to confirm. I asked him if I upset him, if I did anything wrong, or if he just didn't want to hang out with me anymore. So here's the thing. He told me that I did nothing wrong. He told me that he was just afraid that something bad would happen that night, so he had to break up with me. Now, here's the thing that this started here. This did start a quick tension building, and then it went back to like a normal phase sort of for a while. So we just talked about logistics for our first date and some not so deep conversation. And then the first date comes. Now, one thing I'm going to say about grooming is sometimes it can include all four of these stages, but in a less intense fashion. I'm going to explain why and what happened here. So, with our first date, it was maybe a couple of hours, maybe 2, 3, 4 hours. I'm not sure exactly, but maybe a few minutes in, maybe less than an hour, he said, I love you immediately and started calling me perfect, started complimenting me, all that stuff. So, that was that grooming. During the course of the date, there was an incident that occurred. Now, these incidents can be of varying degrees to anybody. Like something that wasn't as urgent to me can be deeply traumatizing to somebody else. The particular incident that occurred, it was unsettling and uncomfortable, but it wasn't traumatic for me. I don't know how to explain it. Like it didn't feel traumatic. It just felt uncomfortable. And I was like, yeah, I guess if I don't let him do this, he's just going to think I'm weird or whatever. But it was just uncomfortable. That's the thing is this grooming is supposed to help calibrate the understanding of what they're going to be able to get away with. Now, after that, he apologized. He called it out. He even took accountability fully. But here's the thing is during that calm phase, during that reconciliation phase, he didn't have enough data on me. He didn't have enough information as far as what he needed to understand what kind of, what he could get away with, what he could use to hurt me. So because of that, it went back to that grooming phase. So I know that was a lot of information, and I know that was a little scary to hear. And depending on the type of situations that you've been through, it may be scary for you as well. But if you need a break for a second, that's totally okay. Feel free to pause, hit play as soon as you need. I'll be here when you get back. But that I just wanted to just go over that example to show you how quickly those stages can shift. All right, now we went over this, but here's the clearest way that I can find to understand it. So an abuser builds trust, connection, dependency, leverage, some sort of thing. Then tension and instability start to grow, and sometimes that tension does not look mean or cruel or even unstable. Sometimes that tension can be urgency, and I'll explain that in a second here too. But after that tension, then abuse occurs, whether it's subtle or overt. The events are often minimized, rewritten, smoothed over, and if they don't have enough data to help mold you into the victim that they want, and I hate to use that word, but that's essentially what a predatory or abusive person is doing, is they're trying to basically make you the person that they want. They're trying to make you the exact version of what they want. An abuser may just be looking for control, domination, etc., but they still want you to be you. That predator or predatory abuser typically wants ownership or full control or full access. So if they don't have enough data to make that happen in the calm phase, they're going to go back to grooming to understand more about you. All right. So I know the way I described that it wasn't easy. So I want you to know too, before we even keep going, none of what happened to you was your fault. If this happened to you, if you're naming it right now, it was not your fault. You're not to blame. And I don't know what else to say. I don't know if there's really any words that can comfort somebody in a situation like that. Lord knows that I haven't really found the right words for myself. But the entire process of healing from something like that and recovering from something like that, it can be a long process. And you deserve whatever time it takes, and you deserve whatever good can come of that process. Now, of course, it's not going to look all like sunshine and rainbows. It's not even fucking close. Sorry for my language. But at the end of the day, if you do the work and you put in the investment, you will get through this. It's not fair. What you have to do to get through what somebody else did to you is not fair. But you can do this. And I'll share some of those resources at the end. And once I do have that domestic violence advocacy certification, I will change how I offer services as well. So I may be able to offer more support once that day comes. But if you do need any more support, I'll be sharing some of those supportive resources at the end. But I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera back off. And we're going to do just a quick overview of all the stages. This isn't going to be a super deep dive, but I'm going to do a quick overview. So we'll go ahead and start with grooming. So with grooming, honeymoon, trust building, that stuff, at its core, this is about building trust, dependency, loyalty, or some sort of leverage that's meant to be exploited later, specifically to harm or dominate somebody or build access. Grooming can look kind, loving, and completely normal from the outside. It can also look cruel, mean, or intentionally destabilizing. And it can also look like both. So someone who's grooming somebody may use what's called intermittent reinforcement. That's where they treat you good 1 second, bad another second. And I also do want to let you know, too, that because of how complicated this stage can be, it often includes all 4 stages in a less intense fashion. So this mean, cruel, intentionally destabilizing, this is kind of like a tension builder. So let's say, they're calling you beautiful, perfect, etc. But then they open their mouth and they're like, I always thought you were kind of prude. So maybe they say something like that after building you up so much. And then they say that. That's actually something that same abuser did. Now, as far as stuff like that, it's basically meant to make them an authority on you, on your life choices, etc. And it's to start establishing that authority very early, and to start and with that grooming phase, they test a few things. They test the waters. They don't dive in head first. They test the waters because they want to get that data. Now, as far as grooming, it can also happen to the people around the victim as well. And this is often why victims are not believed as quickly as they should be. It's possible that the person abusing them may have talked to the people around the victim. They may have told them that they're untrustworthy, or that they need help, or that they're on drugs, what have you. So grooming can really happen to anybody. Now, as far as where the laws are on grooming, I'll go over that next. So legally, grooming is defined as the process of targeting a child or vulnerable adult for exploitation. But this process of building trust in order to exploit somebody can happen to anyone, whether you're an adult, child, etc. And even if you're an adult with a sharp mind, even if you're one of the most intelligent people on this planet, you can still be groomed, you can still be exploited. This can happen to anybody. And if it happens to you, it is not your fault. As I mentioned, grooming can also involve shaping how others see the victim. For example, with triangulation. I have a deep dive on grooming in later workshops. And also in later workshops explain how that tension building phase can be used as a grooming tactic. I'll explain that a little bit here in a moment too, but I won't go into a super deep dive on it. All right, now if you need a break or anything like that, feel free to take a break for a second. I'll be right here when you get back. Now, I'm actually okay, so I'm not going to take a break myself. Just going to breathe for a second because I know I've been going a little bit fast. But if you need a break, feel free to pause and then hit play. I'll be right back here when you get back, okay? So no worries if you need to take a second. But I'm going to go ahead and keep going. So next, we're going to talk about tension building. So this can look a lot like a normal relationship conflict, and it doesn't always look tense. Sometimes it can just look urgent. It may be about money, stress, work, something every day, or maybe the abuser thinks that the relationship is going too slow. So during this stage, an abuser might often start pushing boundaries. They might start joking with the victim at their expense. They might make remarks about friends, family, clothing, life choices. They also may make comments like telling you that you're wrong about anything that your family's doing or anything that a loved one is doing. So, for example, if you talk to an abuser about friends, family, and so on, and let's say those people are causing you some sort of harm and you're venting to your abuser about that, they may actually normalize that harm. They may actually normalize you being around them more because they're not a supportive um, stable for you. So they're not going to help you out of that dynamic. That's what the abuser sees. So they may normalize that. I actually had that experience where I had talked to specifically my ex, not the 13-year-old situation, but my ex. I talked to her about a situation I was experiencing where I was experiencing mistreatment, and she took the side of the other person. Just just to show you how these folks can be. But if they see that you have supportive people outside of the relationship, they may approach that differently. So they may say, like, this person is jealous, they're manipulative, they're toxic, etc. So it can really go from anything. As far as the abuser that I had when I was 13, just a live example, real quick. So the tension building, it didn't look tense, but he did say the words, "I always thought you were kind of prude." He also started asking questions about me, about my sexual history. And he also, so there was one clear marker that was a tension builder. So on my birthday, something did progress sexually. I won't go into details, but it was an act that I was ready for, and I was actually okay with it. But here's the thing is conversations afterward, he kept praising me for that. He kept saying how he was so happy that that happened and all that stuff. Um, so just something to keep in mind. Um, Tension building can also look like being berated over bad decisions or mistakes that you're actively trying to repair. Now, that's different from consequences. So, someone who is enforcing a consequence may not want you around them, or if they do want you around them, they may want XYZ limitations. Someone who is looking to weaponize your past mistakes may do things like berate you regularly, or let's say I don't know, you make a small mistake, like you lose something that's not even theirs. It's something that's just yours and you're mildly frustrated over it. One of my abusers yelled at me over stuff like that. Um, let's say all right, sorry. I know I need a second, so I'm sorry. Just gonna ground in real time here. But the point of tension building is that they will use whatever vulnerability they can to start increasing that tension, to start pushing boundaries, and to start understanding where they can poke and where they can prod and what they can get away with. Any comments or any dissatisfaction that they express, it's not just an expression of displeasure. It communicates disapproval. And that grooming process, they build a power imbalance there. Whether that power imbalance looks gentle at first or not, disapproval can feel very frightening in that situation. And especially if it was calm and then went straight to tense or went straight to an incident, it can feel so frightening and so destabilizing. Because in a power imbalance like that, approval becomes safety, and disapproval becomes a signal that safety might be taken away. All right. So we just have a couple of more slides to cover. That was a lot of information and that was heavy. So if you need a break, it's okay. Like I said, I'll be here when you get back. Um, for me, I'm kind of one of those power through it people. So I'm going to be powering through the rest of this because there's only a couple of more slides. But like I said, if you need to take a break, that is okay. That is okay. That is okay. So I'll be here when you get back if you do. But I'm going to go ahead and go. So the next thing I'm going to cover is the actual incident of abuse. So before I cover that, I do want to make sure it's clear. Abuse is not just physical. So you don't need to have a bruise, a broken bone, or be in any physical pain to have experienced abuse. It can range from anywhere, but is not limited to being kicked, slapped, punched, etc., being called names or threatened, sexual violence, which does include being manipulated, intimidated, pressured, or tricked into multiple sex acts with your partner or with others. So, for example, someone begging, pleading, crying, someone yelling at you or insulting you, stuff like that. It creates an environment where no is not really an option. Emotional manipulation. So emotional manipulation, while it often serves to minimize abuse, it can also serve as the incident of abuse itself. and as well as financial abuse. So all the other 10 types of abuse, they can come up here. And then lastly, we have the reconciliation phase. So during this stage, the person who survived the abuse has some choices, even if the abuser makes them feel like they don't. They can leave the relationship, though the time where somebody is escaping is the most dangerous time in that relationship. Practical and emotional consequences can happen. If individuals are married or leaving together, or live together, leaving with the clothes on your back isn't always possible, but sometimes it's the only option. Sometimes that person is going to kill you if you don't. And I'm sorry to say it so bluntly. Um, but sometimes, though, they'll kill you if you try to leave. So that's why safety planning, especially if you're trying to leave the relationship or if you're trying to stay in it, really, actually, neither of those are more important. Safety planning, staying in the relationship, or safety planning, getting out, both of those are equally important because that could mean the difference between life and death. And especially if you have that plan, you might not freeze the next time that something bad happens. You might be able to reduce that harm in real time. I'll have that safety planning course available, like I said, by March 27th. It's going to include some details on my lived experiences and how I planned for safety there. Just keep in mind that it's not to be used as legal advice. But if you do want to take those details to an advocacy center or to a sexual violence advocate, it may help smoothen the conversation and make it easier to have. Now, as far as the reconciliation phase, though, here's the thing about that phase. So, give me one second here. So, the stage often mirrors grooming. So, it does make the nervous system relax because there's often apologies, reassurance, increased affection, all that stuff. And sometimes there's no apologies, but it may be a gentle normalization, maybe validating why you're upset, validating that you feel what you feel, but also gently redirecting your understanding and your perspective to believing that you deserve that abuse. Now, there's a difference though. As I said, the calm and reconciliation phase often mirrors the grooming phase. Here's the difference is that during grooming, they were learning who you are. They were learning about, the data that they needed to victimize you. During reconciliation, they already know. They know your breaking point, they know your fears, they know your attachment style and your tolerance thresholds. So reconciliation is not a reset, it's a refinement. If someone who's participating in an abusive dynamic does not have enough data when they get to that phase, just like I explained with my other abuser, they might go back to that grooming phase to get more details. But here's a helpful way to think about it. So grooming is often power disguised as connection. Tension is often the power testing its limits. The incident is the power demonstrated, and the reconciliation is the power stabilized. All right, so that is it for day one, my friends. And I'm going to go over just a quick closing thing here. So I'm going to talk about empathy real quick. So one of the hardest lessons that you may have to learn in healing is that empathy is it's important, but you also should direct that empathy inward too. So that empathy should tell you that your needs matter just as much as anybody else's. So your boundaries, your enforcement of those boundaries, those matter too. And nobody should get their needs met by violating other people's boundaries. Empathy is not permission, and understanding somebody's pain does not require tolerating the harm that they cause. But I do want to thank you for your time. Thank you so much for taking this class with me, and just thank you, thank you, thank you. If you need any other parts, just as mentioned, they'll be available later. Just feel free to email me. If you want to email me about questions, feedback, or anything like that, you can do so as well. But thank you for your time and take care of yourself. Oh, I almost forgot. So, a few resources. So, I'm going to be sharing these in a pinned comment as well. So, no worries if you're not able to write it down. All right, but let's go ahead and skip to the end here. Yeah, this is exactly why it's split up into 4 parts. Okay. All right, so we'll start with some national resources. So many states, including my state here in Arizona, have their own DV resource. But there's also a national DV hotline or domestic violence hotline. They have a phone number. You can also text them. There's also a chat option. Now, that chat option is going to connect you with a live human, of course. If you're not ready for human assistance, they also have an AI bot named Ruth. You can also Google Ruth Parasol AI if it's safe. She can help with all types of abuse and not just intimate partner violence, whereas the National DV Hotline may focus specifically on that intimate partner violence. Right. And then just adding some space here, just in case anyone wants to write this down. All right. And then the National Sexual Assault Hotline. So, of course, they have a number, they have a text. There also is a chat option too. And there's also the National Human Trafficking Hotline and 988. I'll go over what those are in a second here. Now, as far as the state domestic and sexual violence coalitions, the hotline actually has a link to all of those. Of course, they have that safe exit option. But what these coalitions do is they often serve service providers, but they also do help survivors as well. So if you're not sure where to turn or where to get started on whatever your goals are, I would reach out to those coalitions, just see if they can help and they can help you understand that. But I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this tab. Oh, almost forgot, actually. And I do need to share more here. All right, 1 second. Okay, so we've got that down. Now, as far as the National Human Trafficking Hotline, we'll go over that next. So with human trafficking, I'm going to actually have a training on that at some point. Not right now. Obviously not right now while I'm doing this. Oh my gosh, sorry, my cat showing up here. All right. So what human trafficking is that it's a form of abuse that involves compelling, coercing, or exploiting somebody for the purpose of commercial sex, labor, or for another person's benefit. There's also other types of trafficking, like organ trafficking, but I'm not going to go over that stuff. Trafficking can occur when someone appears to agree under pressure, manipulation, survival needs, or a lack of alternatives. It often overlaps with domestic violence, sexual exploitation, homelessness, addiction, or dependency on another person. So that's something that this hotline does understand. There's a live chat, a text option, and a call option. Now, they're very specific in that you have to actually be experiencing the legal definition of human trafficking. If you're not sure if the situation you're experiencing is that, the domestic violence hotline may be able to help you understand the differences as well. And the National Suicide Hotline next. So, of course, you can call or text 988. Here's my cat again. There's also a website. There's trained counselors there who will listen and support without judgment. They may not be able to solve everything, but they can help you stabilize and think clearly about your next steps. And all of those sources are free and confidential. And also, I noticed that I'm going to want to. Actually, that makes sense now there. All right, sorry. But I'm going to stop sharing. But hey, thank you for your time today, y'all. I'll have the next training available soon, and y'all take care.